Today I want to talk about whether or not I want an agent. So I talked about this a little bit on the blog on my website. I will link it down below. But obviously the written word cannot always convey certain things. There was a lot that I left out just because I didn't really know how to phrase things properly. So I wanted to do a video where I get like a little more in depth about my thoughts about the publishing industry and getting an agent and all that fun stuff. So first up, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal publishing history to date and then get into what I'm thinking when it comes to getting an agent. So the first time that I ever queried a book was in 2015. I started in the summer and it was for my first book, this one. And it did get published finally, but not in the way that I originally anticipated. At the time in 2015, and then again when I started to query it in 2018, there wasn't as much mainstream bisexual representation, which is what this book was about. And I wanted to get my book out there because of that, because there was like this kind of like gaping hole in publishing and also in entertainment in general where there weren't really any bi people. And there were so many storylines in TV shows, for example, where a character who had previously dated women would be like, oh yeah, now that I kissed this one guy, I'm definitely gay. And definitely that is the reality for some people, but it was just frustrating to me because the concept of bisexuality was never even really considered an option. So I wrote this book because there was such a missing piece in LGBTQ representation. So when I was querying it for the first time, I think definitely the book was not 100% ready to be published. I also just could never tell with the rejections if it was that the book was not the best thing or if there were other reasons for it not getting accepted. I always went with agents who had expressed interest in LGBTQ stories, and the responses I was getting back were mostly things like, oh, this doesn't sound like my type of book, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And the whole time I was always wondering, like, is it actually that the book is not their thing, or is it that they want the L and the G but not the B? I just wasn't sure if it was me or if it was just them not wanting to deal with this representation. So fast forward to 2018, I'm querying again, the book is way better, and I'm still just like dealing with that thought in the back of my head every time I get a rejection, like, is this really the book's fault, or is it that the agent doesn't want bi rep? And that's what was always like haunting me, I guess. I did this pitch contest on Twitter, and 9 Star Press, a small publisher, liked my pitch. And so after looking into them and everything, I decided to submit to them. And when they offered me a contract, I decided to just take it. I still wasn't sure if like I would ever get an agent at that point, because I was like, there's still not really that much bi books in YA, especially not like super mainstream, well-known books. So I went with a 9 Star Press, and I'm so happy that I did. Like, the editor I worked with was amazing. I went on a completely different path than what I originally thought. Like, I thought 100% I was gonna get an agent, I was gonna eventually get published with like a traditional publisher. I could like walk down the street to Indigo and I'd see my book, and that's not what happened. It's not like I regretted going down that path, because I knew going with a smaller publisher, I probably wouldn't experience the experience that I associated with being an author, because it wasn't the traditional way to get published. So fast forward to my second book, and I knew as I was writing it, I knew that I wanted to submit it to the same editor at 9 Star Press, because this book was really difficult for me to write. It was very emotional. It was not necessarily very marketable, I guess, because it was such a serious topic, and I knew that the editor that I was working with would do the story justice. I was really happy with both of my experiences with this publisher, and in the future I would definitely still consider submitting to them. But at the same time, like I kept feeling like there was something missing, and that I needed to get back on the traditional path and like find an agent and everything. I was writing this book that I knew was going to be a little bit more commercial, I guess. I could just tell as I was writing it that it would have a wide appeal, and also in general, like, young adult LGBTQ fiction is amazing right now. There's so much variety, and I was like, this is the time to get an agent to do it. But only recently have I started questioning if that's really the right path that I need to take. So I've been kind of examining, why do I want an agent so much? What am I missing? For one thing, something that I would love to see is to be able to walk into Indigo and just see my book on the shelf with everybody else. To, you know, experience going on book tours, going to book cons, stuff like that. Things that, like, you don't really get to do when you have no agent like me. That was one reason that I was thinking about going down that path, and just being able to have somebody working with me to advance my career and like help me manage things. But then at the same time, even though all those things are amazing and great, there are also certain things about the world of traditional publishing that are not 100% great right now. Like, I follow so many authors on Twitter, reading about their experiences, people talking about how some of their best books that they've ever written were unmarketable and never got published, and how you sometimes have to write to the market because there's money involved, and like, you could pitch an idea to your agent and be so in love with it, and if your agent doesn't like it, like, they could just say pass. There's some books where you try for years to get it published and it goes nowhere, even if the agent believes in it. And it's just like all these things that I was reading about and seeing, and like, there's also so many issues with like power imbalances in publishing and gatekeeping, and so many just like not great things. The whole time I kept clinging to the idea that I needed an agent, and I was like, why am I thinking like this? Because clearly the system as it is flawed. I think I've discovered what the reason was, and it's honestly that I wanted to feel legitimate. I really had to examine why I didn't feel legitimate as I currently was. I think part of it is that there is still kind of like this view that being agented is like the be all and end all of the author experience, and if you have an agent, then you're like the real deal. I don't know, like, there were just times as well where like I was in writing groups and people were getting excited for these pitch contests and then being frustrated that the only people who like their pitches were editors for small presses, things like that. Like, I don't know, I got the impression that like small press is not valued as much as it could be, and that in order to be valued by my peers, I had to get an agent. And is that really what I want to do? Do I really need other people's approval in order to feel like a real author? I don't know. I know that there's some readers out there who would just find the book in their library and decide to pick it up and not care who published it or if the author has an agent. There are definitely some readers in the book community who will pass up on small press books. That really sucks, but there's still people who are really into those books because they're not paying attention to those kinds of things. Yeah, it's just been really weird, like, having all these thoughts recently where like I was so dead set on querying this next book and finding an agent and like becoming a true author, and I don't know now. I can't go seeking validation as my sole reason for wanting an agent. Like, I have to have a better reason than that. It's definitely something that I need to negotiate with myself and I guess dive deep inside to figure out what I really want. Another thing that I've discovered recently, on top of all of that I just said, in Canada, a lot of authors don't have agents. There's a lot of independent publishers out there that are making an impact in the industry. It really comes down to me asking myself, do I want to break into the US market when like none of my books are set in the US and I don't live there? There's so many questions I have to ask myself. I think it's clear that I really should examine other options before I dive headfirst into something, just so that I feel like I am worth it. Yeah, I think the longer that I stay like in author Twitter and learn all these things, the more I've discovered that there's other options out there besides the traditional route. And the traditional route might not be for me, but it also could be. But I really just need to examine why I want to go down that path and if it's really worth it. So that's my story. I hope you have enjoyed this discussion. Please feel free to give me your opinions on querying agents and all that. And please buy these 2 books. That would mean a lot to me. Bye.